Greetings, everybody, and welcome. We'll give attendees another minute or two to join, and we'll get started about 3 minutes after the hour. Again, greetings to those who are just joining. We'll give one more minute for everyone to join us, and we'll start with a brief video before we get into our program today. Thank you for being here.
Terry, I think you need the sound.
So sorry, I'll get right on that.
Science advances best when knowledge, tools, and data are shared. The Open Science Framework, OSF, is a free open source platform built and maintained by the Center for Open Science. OSF helps researchers plan, organize, and share their projects at every stage, from idea to publication. Through our open source ecosystem initiative, COS is opening OSF's development to the wider open source community. Investing in developer-led enhancements that meet researchers' evolving need, strengthen open science practices, and ensure long-term sustainability.
Without a doubt, this is a pivotal moment in the OSF's history. In our history, we have always been open source, so our code has always been available, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've been inclusive of these outside integrations, these outside platforms to come in and be a part of our community and the tools that we're building.
Enabling community development on OSF isn't just a technical step. It's central to COS's mission of making research more open and accessible.
This fits into our mission to advance open science in our pyramid of change. So the base level of that theory of change is to make things possible. So the OSF itself is meant to do that. We're meant to create a platform of tools so that researchers can come in, build their research, and share it openly and transparently. But now we're starting to add in layers to that. We're adding in the community aspect. It's community for community.
Always open source, OSF is now building momentum, inviting the community to shape its future.
Tremendous amount of advancements towards setting it up for open science contributions by any volunteers, setting up the environment, bringing tech stacks to latest versions, making sure the tech stacks are industry standard used ones. And we are at our initial phase with a selected group of folks to be able to work in our code. We have gotten to a point where we are ready to really open it up for anybody who is ready to contribute.
Through NSF's Pathways to Enable Open Source Ecosystems program, COS awarded $80,000 to support the developer-led projects that expand and improve OSF. Awardees are building tools and integrations for the OSF that benefit not only their teams, but the broader research community.
Receiving this award is a great opportunity for us to be able to collaborate with the team at COS and really integrate what we're doing with what they're doing, see more of how it works. And it's been a really great learning experience for us.
To us, it means involvement in a larger effort. We have goals, and those goals align directly with the Center for Open Science. So being able to have our voices heard and be part of the conversation is very valuable to us.
Through their work, awardees are advancing transparency, collaboration, and innovation in research.
We're hoping to make experiments a lot easier for researchers in the behavioral sciences to conduct. We want to make experiments cheaper for behavioral scientists to conduct. We're hoping that a lot of people find real value in the tool.
It will allow anyone using or participating in the OSF project to create their projects, not only for us at the University of Manchester, but it's extended for anyone using the OSF.
We want to standardize how science is done, and we want to improve how it's communicated.
Collaboration with COS and peer awardees has opened new avenues for innovation and growth.
Working with the COS is providing another avenue for achieving the impact that we're going for, and the other awardees have a similar avenue for our improvement. So talking to them and looking for different ways to work together and grow together, hopefully faster than we would have alone.
In the future, I think that most of disciplines are going to be built on top of the data and also code. To do so, open science is mandatory. That's why I believe that open science is so important.
It's building bridges, and we're not in the business of competing with other groups. We're in the business of making sure that science can be shared openly and transparently.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining the Center for Open Science for the second installment of our supporter engagement series, An Open Source Ecosystem for OSF. My name is Terry Four. I'm the Director of Development here at COS, and I'll be with you throughout today's program. When I joined the organization in 2022, I learned that COS had just received a grant from the U.S. National Science Foundation through their Pathways to Open Source Ecosystems program. Having come from an organization that sponsored open source scientific software projects, I was immediately intrigued. Knowing that most of the development and maintenance of our open science framework was done by the software engineers on our staff, I naively asked a colleague, "What does the OSF contributor community look like?" He smiled and responded, "Ask me again in 3 years." If you're in our audience today, you probably know that OSF is an open source, free-to-use research management and collaboration platform that enables open, transparent practices across the entire life cycle of a research project. More than 900,000 registered users around the world and across dozens of fields of science and scholarship rely on OSF to pre-register their experiment designs and analysis plans, share their data, publish their preprints, and report their study outcomes, all while collaborating with their peers. One of OSF's key features, which will be relevant to our conversation today, is its open API that allows for integration with several other widely used research tools and platforms. This means that researchers can, for example, make their data more FAIR compliant by depositing data sets directly from OSF to Dryad, link their GitHub repositories to other components of their research projects, or automatically assign workflow elements a DOI on Crossref, all in one place. I'm excited to be with you today because we have arrived at that moment that my colleague referred to. Our team at COS has launched an open source ecosystem for the Open Science Framework. This ecosystem will serve as a mechanism for engaging software developers in research communities who use OSF. Now, our team can co-develop integration solutions with researchers, meaning that together we can more quickly and effectively address user pain points and remove obstacles to practicing open science. It's an important occasion in the history of OSF. In today's event, you'll learn how our discovery conversations with dozens of software developers, program managers, community leads, and other open source experts help us to scope this initiative. You'll also hear from members of the first cohort of integration projects that have gone through the program, who will share their perspective on how important it is that we have usable, flexible, durable technology infrastructure to support open science. Our goal is for you to come away not only informed, but also inspired about the continued potential of this approach to infrastructure development. A note before we begin that there are many applications of research software development, and many talented individuals and teams are doing complex and fascinating things to improve and advance software for science, many of whom I know are in the audience today. Likewise, the term open source entails countless types of technology products and strategies and looks quite different depending on the context. Rather than surveying these many instances, the purpose of today's event is instead to illustrate one unique and valuable application of open source principles and approaches in support of open scholarship, as well as to showcase the great partnerships we've formed so far, plus highlight the potential for even more. Finally, before we begin, I should say that the vital research infrastructure you'll learn about today and the partnerships we're engaging in to enhance it are simply not possible without financial resources. My fundraising team at the Center for Open Science works throughout the year with public funding agencies and higher education institutions here in the United States and abroad to ensure that we are sustainable. But the reality we face is that we cannot maintain these public goods without private philanthropic support. This includes funding from private philanthropic foundations, corporate sponsorship, and even donations from individuals who understand the importance of tools like OSF to scientific discovery and open innovation. For this reason, I encourage you to think throughout today's program about how you might be able to help us to enable open science in the ways that you'll hear about shortly. Perhaps you work for a public agency or a private funder of research. Maybe your company has a philanthropy program that could connect with us to explore sponsorship opportunities. Or maybe you'd like to join the hundreds of researchers, scholarly support professionals, and other individuals who each year make a personal donation to COS because they believe in our mission of bringing more trustworthiness to science and improving the research process. Whatever the case, and whatever your motivation, we are grateful that you are here with us today. A personal note before I move on that I am in the final recovery stages from a minor cold, and so you'll forgive me if I take a pause or take a drink of water throughout the program today. Without further delay, I would like to introduce my colleague, Nikki Pfeiffer, our Chief Product Officer who leads our product and engineering teams. Nikki, hi there.
Hey, Terry. Hi, everyone.
Doing well today, I hope?
Yes, thanks. Hope you're feeling better.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, coming along. Before we dive into our conversation, I thought I would ask our team, our colleagues that are helping to run the webinar today to introduce an audience poll just to get a better sense of our audience and the experience in the room today, as it were, with open source software. So if we wouldn't mind putting that Zoom poll up quickly. And we'll leave that open for just a few minutes to get some responses from people. Maybe while that's going on, Nikki, I should tell you that I was eating breakfast this morning. My wife walks into our kitchen and she says, "Are you excited?" And I said, "Yes, I'm definitely excited, but a little bit nervous. I know there are a lot of COS partners and important folks in the room today, and I try to do the best job I can of making these programs for these events fresh and engaging, just so people have a good time while they're learning about us." And I stopped talking because my wife was staring at me like she had no idea what I was talking about. And she said, "I meant, are you excited to listen to the new Taylor Swift album that was released last night?" And I said, "Oh, well, I think you and I have different things on the mind today, but, I guess we can be excited about multiple things."
Yeah, maybe we should have played some of Taylor's new music at the start of this webinar just to get everybody's juices flowing.
I'm gonna note that, and well, for the next event, we'll have something queued up.
Yeah, next time.
This is a really interesting distribution of people who have, people's experience, I suppose, or familiarity with open source software. So it looks quite even distribution between folks who are, software engineers or, researchers who develop software themselves, all the way to, folks who are brand new and just here to learn more. So that surprises me in a good way. I thought maybe it would skew more heavily towards folks who were developers themselves, but this is nice. Great, thank you for your participation, everybody. And Nikki, I suppose to kick off our conversation, I mentioned in my introduction that this open source ecosystem was born from a grant that COS received from NSF back in 2022. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what motivated your team to seek this type of support in the first place. So, for example, what challenges was OSF facing at the time, or maybe another way to think about it is what opportunities did you and your team sense that this type of open source approach could allow us to take advantage of?
Yeah, that's a great question, Terry. Thanks for asking. Yeah, as was sort of played in the intro video, but I'll sort of repeat because I think it's important to understand. OSF had been an open source tool software since it launched, which meant that our code repositories were all open to the public, and the code was openly licensed for reuse. And we were also as an organization, always striving to use open source libraries and tools as part of our software development sort of approach and philosophies, if you will. However, it didn't mean necessarily that it was easy for others that weren't here at COS in the day-to-day developing the OSF software and processes, that they could easily get involved, on board to that, and contribute in a meaningful way. And so, I think that we made several attempts over the years to try to encourage and even incentivize contributions from communities. So I think like that's part of it too. Over that same period of time, OSF was, continuing to be developed, and we were working closely with lots of research communities and hearing how, some of the challenges that they were facing in adopting some of these open science practices within their workflows. And some of those challenges were things we were trying to solve for, certainly. And then also, kind of recognizing that we were trying to encourage others to help develop those solutions. But again, didn't necessarily make it as easy as needed for those developers and other community members to contribute. And so those are some of the lessons that we sort of learned through some prior experiences and engagement with different communities that wanted to support OSF in various ways. And so, I think my colleague Daniel Steger will talk a little bit more about this. He had many conversations to try to unpack what some of those challenges were specifically and what those needs would be so that we can enable that. But when we saw the NSF program for Pathways to Open Source Ecosystems, we felt like this is the answer to some of the challenges we faced, because we had the code bases out there, but what we really needed to do was create really solid documentation, really good onboarding, some governance structures, some different ways to really establish a community of the contributors, so that it really enabled the sort of growth we wanted to see across communities and the OSF. Also, just worth something else you mentioned earlier was that OSF has also always had an open API. And so that's also just part of sort of our founding and the things that we wanted to offer and make available to all of our stakeholders. And it did mean that it made it fairly straightforward for others to start to build tools that pushed and pulled from OSF content to support sort of the in and out workflows connected to OSF. And so we did that, and then it did take off. There have been a number of different examples over the years where different tools have been developed by PIs, labs, or other sort of research communities to work with OSF projects. So some examples of those are like the R community. Researchers use R a lot in their analyses, and so the community developed sort of a package that would work with OSF that would pull files from an OSF project, run an analysis through R, and then push back results. And this helped enable some of those end-to-end workflows around sort of data and data analyses that were transparent and actually reproducible. And those are some of the things that are, very important when you're trying to do rigorous research in an open and transparent way. Another example actually that reminds me of a year ago when we held a similar event, and we had Lenny Tadelman from Protocols on, just talking about how they use the OSF API to put into their application a way for researchers to sync their protocols to their OSF projects. So again, just the ability to be more transparent and reproducible in their workflows by showing how maybe the data outcomes or preprints that might be on OSF or related to a protocol that was part of the specifics of a research process. So I think all of this sort of demonstrates how OSF was starting to enable more of an open source ecosystem, but hadn't had necessarily the resourcing to go back and really fill in some of the gaps that over the years we had learned we needed to address to make it possible to support an ecosystem where research workflows for rigorous and transparent and open research were possible, helping sort of adopt those open science practices in a more efficient and less burdensome way. When tools can talk to each other, it really lowers that burden. And so that was something we saw as a need and saw this NSF POSE program as an opportunity to help support and enable.
Yeah, I think the members of the audience today who are developers themselves or maybe work on one or multiple open source projects have an appreciation for it, but it's so much work and so much strategizing to open a project to receive open source contributions. I'm not a developer myself, but I did mention that I've worked with a number of OSS teams in the past, and just it's remarkable to me how difficult it is. And so it's encouraging, I think, to see us as an organization take this step to to accommodate that that sort of contribution and help build that community as you're suggesting. Another question, Nikki, I had for you was that at the Center for Open Science, we use the phrase life cycle open science when talking about our mission. Could you help us understand what that means and how technology tools like OSF enable life cycle open science?
Sure. Yeah, so for me, lifecycle open science really just means being transparent and rigorous throughout your research endeavors. Again, trying to be as broad as possible in what domains of research could participate. I think all can in different ways. It may mean different things for different communities. And so therein lies sort of part of the challenge that we're trying to address through this open source ecosystem. So it ultimately means that for a given research project or study, all the plans and outputs such as data, materials, protocols, code, whatever outcomes are findable sort of in a publicly accessible platform and are all linked together. So that means that the plan for the research is shared, and it's something that the team that's working on it can collaborate and be open and transparent about how they sort of develop their plans. And as the plan is carried out, the various outputs that could happen throughout the course of that work are transparent and somewhat traceable, meaning, I can follow along even if I'm not part of it. I can understand sort of what you did under what conditions or constraints to sort of understand a piece of knowledge that you're extracting. And then at the end, where, hopefully some outcomes of that work are published and are transparent, that's something that then is all linked together in a way that, like, if I arrive at your work through GitHub and finding your code, it's something that I am interested in. I can also then follow to where the preprint might be, or the data or something else. Maybe your research is just code development, and that's also fine, but it probably gets some other type of publication or translation work that then is linked and connected. So all that to say, I think it's just it's a broad term that, again, in the context of a specific type of research endeavor, it means different things, but ultimately it's transparent, it's traceable, it's fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and it's all kind of linked together in a way that no matter what entry point you take at what point in time of the life cycle of that work, you can understand what else has occurred or is planned or is occurring, to keep track of all of those pieces. I guess for OSF specifically, one sort of aspect of how we're supporting that is really to think about being a place where those different steps in the life cycle could occur on different tools. I don't think realistically there is one tool that can solve it all. I've been a researcher myself. I know there are a number of different instruments and platforms that are utilized sort of from the start to the end of all that goes into what I described earlier as sort of that life cycle. And so I think to help support researchers and stakeholders who are sort of consuming that research and being able to follow that along, I think we want to enable a way in which those different platforms and tools can talk to each other and share sort of the discrete outputs and their metadata in an interoperable way. So I guess some examples of that within OSF is like, for example, the integration with like the Zotero libraries. So it means that you can organize and share your citations or literature reviews in an easy way for others to be able to access when they're looking at maybe your study plan or your preprint or something. So it's just the traceability, I think, and the metadata and interoperability between those platforms. Similarly, we have some integrations with different file storage. Again, in the process of planning and collaborating and organizing your research, I think there's a number of different artifacts that occur in a storage sort of storage solution there. And so being able to easily just connect right into that instead of the download and the upload and then, different versions and like all of those things. It's like right there synced up and easy for someone else to access and follow along. And then, similarly, the data. So one integration is with our team at Dataverse, a partner that we work with. And so you can connect that data that's stored on Dataverse with very rich metadata directly into OSF. So it can connect to your research plan or your code on GitHub. There's a number of different integrations, again, meant to help reduce that barrier and burden for researchers to have to find all these things and upload and download things in different ways. And I think we have done a fairly good job of trying to support that need. And be interoperable across the life cycle. But I think it is my sincere desire to push that even further. And so just to kind of shout out to NIH's Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, GRAY, where we've gotten the opportunity to collaborate with other generalist repositories, Dryad, Zenodo, Dataverse, Figshare, Vivly, Mendeley Data, they're all there. And what we've done together is develop some standards for metadata to enable that interoperability across different tools. And so I hope we can continue to push on that, where we could connect our outputs that we might have to each other in a meaningful way that helps reduce that burden for researchers, just to enable that life cycle as we were talking about.
That makes sense. One of the lessons I suppose I learned pretty quickly when joining COS was that a research study design and a life cycle, if you will, looks very different across different research disciplines, domains, fields. And for the researchers and those who support research here in the audience today, I'm sure that sounds like kind of stating the obvious, but for me it was interesting to step into my role here, seek support for OSF, but also, talk quite a bit with researchers and just get their perspective on like, hey, here's how OSF is meeting my needs, and here's how far you have to go before I can really, utilize it to, its fullest extent, I think. And so I think that's one of the many reasons why I'm so excited about this open source ecosystem program, because I think it really, is a huge step in like meeting the huge variety of research needs across fields and co-creating those solutions with researchers themselves. I've got an interesting question in the Q&A. I wonder, though, in the interest of time, Nikki, if you wouldn't mind, after this session, if you would be able to respond to that in the chat. It's a question about the NSF testbed, the programmable cloud libraries. So maybe I can ask you to answer that.
Sure.
And I do encourage the audience to continue submitting questions. We'll get to as many as we can. Finally, Nikki, maybe just zooming out, as it were, a little bit, I wanted to ask you, so again, on the topic of perhaps stating the obvious, open source isn't just a software development strategy. Some people refer to it sometimes as an ethos or an idea that represents certain values and ideals, things like accessibility, interconnectedness, community participation. So I'm wondering, considering those ideals or those values, how do you see those complementing our mission at COS to improve research and make it more trustworthy, across the life cycle, but also across many domains?
Yeah, this is a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, sort of somewhat saying the obvious, but maybe it's something that folks would challenge a little bit. But I see the values of open science and open source as highly aligned. In fact, I actually find it really difficult to see a future, sort of in my mind, where we have open and transparent research that's not reliant on some open source technology and tools. I think open science gives us the opportunity to break down barriers, accelerate discovery, improve rigor of our research and trust in our research, and democratize that access to all of that knowledge. And yet I find that sometimes the pace of that discovery and dissemination can be slowed often by sort of the siloing of tools, the lack of sustainable infrastructure to empower all of that work, and then the unequal access of knowledge, which again is one of the principles they both share of inclusivity and collaboration. So I feel like the ecosystem around open scholarship, open science is an opportunity to really co-create with communities that's premised on those principles that underpin both open scholarship and open source development. But I would put a third one in there, which is public goods. I think that both of those sort of principles are shared with public goods as well, and the open source communities that are supporting open scholarship as well really could help shift the norms to the more open and transparent practices in research. And I think that it really does bolster the transparency, the collaboration, sort of the flexibility needed, like you were sort of saying, that within different domains of research, there's going to be unique and different needs. But the beauty is when we build in a modular sort of open source way, that's not siloed and kept away from those other communities. And a lot of times there are shared things. There are things that are building blocks that others can utilize in and build from or take from. And so I think that's the opportunity here. To just continue to sort of foster that type of environment. I also think that, some of the things that you were kind of getting at the beginning, I think when there's a shared sort of investment, collective support for this type of open infrastructure as a public good, we all benefit. There's shared benefit, but it also reduces the costs, right? The cost to maintain that and support that ongoing. So it's certainly more cost effective. It is by design then more inclusive, I think, when you have that transparency and collaboration as a key component. And I personally really am part and partial to this free from lock-in kind of experience for researchers. I think that's really, really critical and something open source really enables. And then I think we talked a little bit about the sort of openness and transparency, fairness, all of those things I think are bolstered when you collaborate across different domains and communities to design and develop those solutions. So I think ultimately that the ethos, as you called it, or ecosystem, is strengthened through both of these things, and then this third piece, which is really just seeing it as a public good. Just if I can kind of plug how reliant I think we as a society have started to become on more open source infrastructure solutions. I recently looked at a Harvard Business Review article that was kind of talking about this, the value of open source software that they put out last year, just talking about how much this equates to. Again, it's very hard to put dollars on these that type of infrastructure, but it's 8.8 trillion is what they estimated. Who knows what the true number really is, but I think that there's a lot of value in that, and just recognizing that these contributions really are moving this movement forward, and the innovation that's coming from the collaborations that we've already started to have, but I hope just become just more normative, I think is just really exciting to see, and makes me hopeful for a future where this is part of just how we do research going forward.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate the value of open source software and open source tools of all kinds. So I'm hoping that, through events like today's, that, we're able to get the word out about, how open research fits into that too, and how it's supported by these open source tools, just how valuable it is. So, Nikki, thank you very much for joining. Really appreciate talking to you as always, and good luck to your team for the rest of the journey with the open source ecosystem.
Thanks, Terry. Great to talk with you also.
Moving ahead in our program, I am now pleased to introduce two more of my colleagues who have been leading our work on the open source ecosystem program from the beginning. Daniel Steeker is Technical Community Manager on our product team, where he works to coordinate OSF-related collaborations between our staff and external partners. Huda Ikeda is Senior Software Engineer on our engineering team and has been helping to maintain and develop OSF for several years. Huda, how long have you been with the organization again?
I think 6 years now. Yeah, 6 years and a little bit.
Great. So you've not only seen, but have been a part of a lot of change on OSF in that time. Well, welcome to you both. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Certainly. Daniel, I thought I'd start by posing you this question. So as part of the initial scoping of this program, you conducted interviews and had informal conversations with dozens of research software developers, open source community managers, technical program leads, so forth. As I understand it, the goal with that was to make sure we were learning as much as possible from others who had substantial experience with open source approaches and could offer us guidance and help us anticipate, challenges that might arise. So wondering if you could describe what insights you picked up from those conversations and kind of what was most illuminating about them.
Yeah, of course. And for clarification, I've been here for 4 years, and it's not a competition, Fuda, so it's not there. Yes. So as part of this grant, we were actually lucky enough that it was a grant requirement that we needed to go out and do interviews to understand the landscape of open source communities. Not only just general open source communities, but open source communities within science. And we just so happened to be lucky that this happened to be a requirement. So before we actually got started, we actually did over 100 interviews. It was about 2 years ago. This open source community has been in the works for quite a while. But one of the things that we did was we went out and we talked to open source experts. So anybody who had open source experience, contributors, leaders in open source communities. We also talked to people who we've worked with in the past, open source people that we've worked with, or different projects or integrations that have tried to work with us in the past, and looked for pain points, look for things that we were not doing well. I think part of the opportunity of doing this is that you get to take a really hard look in the mirror on what are the things that you're doing well already and the things that you're not. Because if you don't do that, then you're really not going to grow at all. So luckily we were able to learn quite a bit. Uh, but going into it, you also want to be humble. So just to be clear, I think we went in, we were a little too humble. We, you know, knew nothing like Jon Snow. So what I'm actually going to do here is Terry has given me permission to take the wheel and give you a little bit of a demo of some of the spaces that we have for our open source community. It's hard to talk about what we've learned as themes from this open source interviews and things that we've taken out of it. It's better to show you how we've actually applied it rather than just give you kind of a, you know, presentation slide and just have a couple of bullet points. That's not really meaningful. So give me a second here. I'm going to share my screen. First thing I want to do is I want to take you to, any open source space. It's probably going to be based on GitHub. GitHub is really the world of open source. And this is our Center for Open Science GitHub page. Now, as Nikki had mentioned and I had mentioned in the video that you guys saw earlier, all of our code for the Center for Open Science and the OSF itself is publicly available on GitHub. The problem is that we were not very accommodating to these new people coming in. So one of the things we learned in our interviews is that you need to make this first space, this link, and Fuda will even send this link out to everyone in the chat if you want. This first GitHub landing page needs to be as welcoming as possible. So one of the things you do is you make this README file, this README text, which is basically just a wiki that you can actually put anything you want. You want it to be as accommodating to not only these engineers, that 25% of people that were in our audience who were engineers, people who were open source people. You want it to be even readable to the layman. So the 27% of people who are just here to be excited and learn. So if you go through this, you'll look and see, hey, there's glossary terms for the OSF. So specific terms that are for our site. What are our main GitHub repositories? How do you contribute? How do you join the community? How do you get involved? This needs to be a very clear, easy roadmap for somebody who's just coming in, stops by, finds the link and goes, wow, they're actually building something here. Communities need to be living and growing rather than a stagnant page where you're hoping that you're seeing what's happening. It needs to be very clear and as easy as quickly as possible. Second thing that we saw was that documentation. Documentation is key. If somebody doesn't know how to use your work and your all of your code and how things are put together, they're not going to be able to do anything, and it's kind of dead in the water right there. So the second thing we did was we took a really hard look at our current documentation. We have documentation for our API, which is separate from this, but we rewrote all of that code, worked with that. Fuda can also talk to you a little bit about some of the work that we did on our infrastructure side to make it possible for these integrations to even be here. But the documentation is also something we looked at. So all of these documentations, as you can see, they were made in the last 6 months, because we've been constantly working and improving these things. So everything from contributor guidelines to what are the community events, governance tools, all the tags for how you're going to be tagging your projects on the open source. And again, this README file that's kind of following along here. The other thing that I want to make note of is that this wasn't just us writing these tools. We actually had additional focus groups after we wrote up all these documents and had community members from open source communities come in, read the tools and go, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that doesn't make any sense. Cross that out. You need to get rid of this. You need to add a new thing here. Because just because something's intuitive to me and Foda here writing it, it doesn't mean that it's intuitive to every person that's reading it. So that's one of the key things that I wanted to make note of here, is that the community has been a part of building this since the very start. The next pillar and thing that came out of those interviews is that it's mandatory. You have to have some way of communicating with the team, whether that is our Slack internally, or it's something like a Discord space. Now, this particular Discord space works really well with GitHub because that's kind of, those two things go hand in hand. They're almost built for each other. But one of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure that each group has kind of their own space, but then it's a living, breathing community. So we have spaces for, say, announcements. We have code release that will be connected to our GitHub space so that anytime there's a code release, there's a notification here. Very clear onboarding, starting guides. We have onboarding events. Additionally, each one of our projects, which we'll talk about in a minute, has their own public space, their own public channel where they can ask us questions. We can go back and forth, and they can message Fuda, myself, some of the other engineers directly, get an answer right away. But they also have their own team leads that are leading each one of these projects. Each week, Fuda and myself are available for office hours, and we also have weekly sync up, Scrum meetings with each one of these projects to make sure that everybody's on the same page moving forward with each one of these projects. The other thing, and I want to kind of take a step back here, one of the big things that is made known when it comes to community management and just community management in general, you have to take a step back and say, obviously, this is what I'm going to get out of this, and what our team is going to get out of this is that, we're opening our tools to outside collaborations. We can add more tools to the OSF, all those fantastic things. You have to think about it from their perspective. Who is participating? How are you going to make that worth their while? So if it's general open source participants, you're thinking about students or people who are trying to get their name out there, who are just trying to learn, build their CV, their resume, things like that. With these particular groups, which the groups that we're targeting here, projects, a lot of what they're trying to do is they're trying to connect with us. They're trying to connect with our user base. That's where they're seeing a lot of their value. I'll talk more about that in a bit. But you can also see kind of behind the curtain, one of the groups that we're thinking about opening up here is actually having small beta testers of OSF users. The idea being that they could come in, they can have a space where they can share their product, their idea, and then have direct access to OSF users who can help them improve their product. It's a direct benefit to them that they wouldn't get if they weren't part of the community. Lastly, there's other elements here. You need a steering committee. You need a group of unbiased people who are outside of your organization who are helping lead and make changes. That's a group that meets on a monthly basis. You're actually going to get to talk to two of them today, which is fantastic. The last thing I want to point out here before we get going is that, and this is kind of like one of those key faults, one of those main problems that you'll see open source, the cardinal sins of open source communities is that if it's everybody's responsibility to be building a project, it's no one's responsibility to be taking care of that project. Which is kind of tricky to understand because, these open source projects, you're thinking, oh, it's a bunch of people helping out with the project. It still needs to be run in a project management standard. So one of the actual tips and tricks that we actually received from these interviews is that you can actually use on GitHub these project spaces. It's actually a criminally underused tool on GitHub, but you can actually track projects very openly. And again, this is one of those things you can look at on our GitHub page, but you can actually see that there are projects from each one of our awards here. So I'm actually going to go to like University of Manchester, which is an institution group that we worked with for one of their projects. And you can come in and immediately see what are the things that they are working on. What project, what is the status of those projects? How high the priority is it? And we can actually get details about each one of these things that are happening at that moment. Additionally, what we're hoping to do is the next step is actually open up some of these projects to a general open source community where you're having the ability to say, we would need help with, we need a JavaScript expert, a Python expert, somebody to come in and help out with one particular task. You're able to set the parameters of what that task is. But again, that is these projects leads setting the goal, setting the project. All we're doing is creating the ecosystem around it in order to build these integrations and build these tools. So we are, again, giving them a couple of different benefits here. One, this is an optional way for them to manage their projects. Two, they're able to provide access to our open source community for contributions, things that they can help out with, but then they can also receive help on being able to produce all these things. So I'm going to take a step back because this is a really great stopping point for some of our next questions that are coming up. But this really sets up and shows, what are the frameworks for each one of the projects that we ended up selecting this year. So I'm going to stop sharing so Terry can start asking more questions.
I appreciate you sharing that, Daniel. And I think it's important to give the audience a sense of what it looks like kind of day to day for these projects to be collaborating with us. And I do recall I sat in on a few of those interviews that you did with open source folks. And one of the themes was the challenge that contributions to open source projects beyond just the code. So things like documentation, things like community management often don't get the recognition and the thanks that they deserve. So I know that's an ongoing challenge in a lot of open source communities. So I'm glad that that surfaced early on in your conversations, and we're kind of accounting for that as we go.
Mhm. Yeah, those are living documents and they need just as much help as the code bases do. So that's a very good call out, and it's something that's very needed that anyone can go and read and help out with.
Sure. In the interest of time, I'm going to maybe combine a couple of questions that I had prepared for you all, and maybe I'll pose this to Fuda or Daniel. Either one of you, please feel free to respond to this one. But maybe tell us a little bit about this first cohort of projects that have gone through the program. We're going to hear from Jason and Josh here in just a minute, who will go into more detail about their specific projects. But we also had a project from the National Institute of Informatics in Japan and one from the University of Manchester. Maybe describe, kind of how the selection process took place for these projects and, what it was like working with them day to day.
Can I tee it up for you, Fuda?
Oh, yeah, of course.
All right, cool. So one of the things that I want to make note of is that this isn't like a traditional award, like a grant award where somebody applies and you say, that's a great idea, here you go, and you're on your way. It's kind of more hands-on than that. And the second point that I want to make note of is that you're selecting people as much as you are selecting a project. The goal with these projects and these awards that we were giving out is that we wanted people who would be a pillar of the community that we are trying to build. So we wanted people who are going to be involved, people who not only are passionate about open source, but passionate about what we're building here as well. So there's kind of multiple layers to that rubric that we were kind of evaluating, creating people. And I don't actually need to go into details about each one of those merits. So whether that's, value to the OSF users, value to the OSF itself, our organization, anything like that. We don't have to go into too much about that, but there's multiple layers to this process. So once we had kind of honed in on who we wanted to work with, it wasn't as simple as us saying, yeah, absolutely, come on in. We actually had these award winners come in and meet with our engineering team in like an ARB review process where we bounced ideas back and forth of each other. There was some honing of these ideas to make sure that their ideas fit with our system. And it was the beautiful thing about that is not only were you focusing in on what that project was going to look like, we were also creating connections and relationships. And people were actually getting faces to names before we got started. So I'll pass it off to Fuda because he can talk a little bit more about some of the different types of integrations that we had and even how we were changing our definitions of integrations as they were kind of coming along.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I'll talk about the two projects that we don't have representatives from, as I'm sure Josh and Jason will be able to describe their projects better than I can. Yeah, so the first project that we supported was this PDF export of OSF projects. This was in collaboration with the University of Manchester. I think you guys saw their sprint board earlier. They organized it very well, so, so it's a great example of what that project space can look like. But yeah, the project aims were to allow users to export their OSF projects, their information off of the OSF and into a PDF form. And so this ability to export OSF objects has been a long requested feature. This is to help researchers with archiving, reporting, audits, and many other things here. So this is a great first step in addressing this gap in our functionality. And the University of Manchester teams created a new tool that uses our API to get the project's data from the OSF export it into a PDF form with the project's metadata, wiki content, file and component metadata, as well as other important information. And so they have this tool currently hosted online, the University of Manchester does, on a Streamlit app, and it's also available to download through PyPy, and this is a Python package repository. And so this is a new tool, and we hope that we can develop this tool further with our open source community, allow users to export their OSF content into other formats like RO-Crate or Baggit, and I'm sure there are plenty of other formats that folks want supported depending on what type of research they're doing. The other one that I would like to talk about is expanding our add-ons ecosystem to support Azure Blob Storage. So this is an extension of an existing partnership that was alluded to earlier with some of our partners in Japan called NII, or the National Institute of Informatics. So they have an instance of the OSF that they host called Gakunin RDM, and that caters to Japanese institutions and researchers. And they've developed support for storage integrations, or what we call add-ons, that the current OSF does not, and among many other things that they've developed as well. And so these storage integrations or add-ons are how users are able to access their Google Drive or Dropbox content on the OSF. And yeah, just to zoom out a little bit and just to kind of give some context on some of the engineering efforts that went to support this project. Daniel alluded to this earlier, but we had some ongoing effort to help streamline the OSF's code, and we rewrote how the OSF communicates to these external services like Google Drive, GitHub, and other services. And so we separated this code for communicating to these services out of the main OSF.io code base and into its own repository. And we created a new service called Gravy Valet. And the name, I do not take any responsibility for this name. It's just a play on words.
I've heard your engineering team talk about it a number of times.
Yeah. It's a play on words from one of our existing services. It's like many engineering things, it's just a weird inside joke. But yeah, so this project with NII serves as a bit of a test bed for us to work with external contributors, to add new storage providers to the OSF, and hopefully in the future we can work with other partners to integrate other storage solutions using Gravy Valet. So those are the two projects that are not able to make it today. So hopefully that kind of gives an idea of what kind of stuff that we're looking to support with this project.
Thanks for that explanation, Fuda, and Daniel. Thank you both for joining and kind of offering as I said, a glimpse into when we say collaboration with partner researchers. I think what you just described hits the nail on the head and really exemplifies what the work looks like day to day. So thank you both.
Mm-hmm.
In our meeting program, we had originally scheduled an intermission, but in the interest of time, I think I will forego. And so if the audience doesn't object, and if Josh and Jason also don't object, I think I'd like to go ahead and go into the final session of our program today. So Jason, Josh, are you both with us? Greetings.
Hi.
Hey there. Nice to see you both again. Just by way of quick introduction. So these two gentlemen here are members of two of the project teams that participated in our first program cohort. So Joshua DeLeu is Associate Professor of Cognitive Science at Vassar College and led the DataPipe project, which we'll hear more about in just a moment. And Josh also developed JSPsych, which is a JavaScript framework for creating behavioral experiments that run in a web browser. And Jason Wolgemuth is a research and development scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is a federally funded research and development lab in Tennessee here in the United States. Jason represents the Acorn project, which was a little unique among projects in the cohort for reasons we'll get into in just a moment. But both of you, thanks again for making the time to join us today, and I'm glad to be speaking with you. Josh, I figured I would start maybe with you. And so with your project with DataPipe, behavioral researchers can now not only create and store data from online experiments on OSF automatically, they can do so in a way that the data is immediately available to share. Can you describe in more detail some of the pain points that researchers were previously experiencing that you developed DataPipe to help address?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this. So researchers, of any discipline, have to deal with the fact that when we do things in this open way, it does add a little bit of extra work, and we have to do things like manage our data sets and make them available, write good documentation about them, and so forth. And so what DataPipe is trying to provide is sort of a specialized use case for behavioral researchers who are running experiments online, where that data is automatically sent to an OSF component as soon as it's created. And the thing we're trying to address here is sort of a lack of maybe follow through, not any intentional way, but it can be another step at the end of a long research process to get the data all ready to go. And so this is just a way to make sure that that happens automatically, and in some ways make it even easier than to not do it, because you can just rely on OSF and DataPipe to handle the data side of things, and you don't have to worry about storing things in a particular specialized way.
That makes sense. And at the Center for Open Science, when we're talking to researchers over the years, we have picked up on the fact that, of course, some open practices can at first seem like extra burden, right? Just layered on top of everything else a researcher has to do throughout their research study. So it sounds like DataPipe is a pretty good example of an integration that helps mitigate that extra burden, and instead it just streamlines it within the workflow. Is that
Yeah,
Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
Jason, I mentioned that your project Acorn is unique in the sense that it is used to enhance the accessibility and the usability of research activity data, or RAD, which you told me is the raw information, evidence, and documentation collected and analyzed during a research study. So in other words, we're talking about data that potentially spans multiple research studies. I'm curious to know, for whom is research activity data, RAD, for whom is it most valuable? I mean, are we talking about lab managers, institutions, or even would it be particularly useful for meta scientists who study the research process itself?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's like my physics teacher in college used to say, "So what big deal? Who cares? Why are you doing this?" And
Right.
not to give like the general annoying answer, but pretty much anyone, right? Like it's all the way from citizen scientists or taxpayers in the case of America, United States, that, where are my taxes going? What are we doing? If you're a job seeker and you want to see where you can leverage your skills and you want to work at Oak Ridge, I mean, for example, because that's where we're starting, you could easily query this data and be like, oh, well, they use this project X uses things I'm good at and gives a point of contact. So now you have a directed vector for talking to somebody. But then obviously policymakers, current and future sponsors, and I love that you say meta science, because Audrey, my co-conspirator that couldn't make it today, she's too busy having fun somewhere else, right? We wax philosophic a lot about whether or not we should use the word meta science in our description, because we talk about RAD, right, which is essentially the project layer, and we have a cool diagram for that too. But the meta, I mean, we're doing meta science. We're literally we're doing science about science. And so instead of saying meta science, we typically say science all the way down. And so we're trying to,
Interesting.
right? Because this feels like, let's be real, it's a safe space. It feels like in science, you do science, and then there's a point where you just you stop applying science, and it's usually around the communications and HR and kind of organization level. And we're just like, why would that be? I mean, science is, it's a way of thinking, it's a logical framework we should use for everything. So blah 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 blah. It applies to everything. Like, we want all the things. And if you're interested in getting added to the conversation, please reach out to me, because we are looking for friends. I mean, that's why we're here. But I feel like I might have lost the plot. But so yeah, everyone, and it's a project level. Just that's a unique. Oh, last thing, the meta science thing that we've noticed recently, we've kind of got into the mindset, is there's no clear bucket for meta science at a place like Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So obviously that's where we work, and that's our initial focus. And so we're seeing, like in science, you have a lot of domains, a lot of silos, right? And so if you want to get something moved, you have to pick a domain, you have to pick a silo, and then have success in that. And so when we've been peddling our wares and we apply to everything, people are like, well, how's this going to help me in biophysics? How's this going to help me in nuclear nonproliferation? How's this going to help me in, you name it? We're like, well, it's going to help everyone. And, somebody needs to, so we're kind of in the process of that. So especially if you're a federal entity, please talk to us, because that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to understand science at the project level.
Yeah, that makes sense. Science all the way down. I haven't heard that phrase before, but I might pick up on it and use it if you don't mind.
It's all yours. Trademark, patent pending.
Maybe sticking with that question or that theme for a minute, if you wouldn't mind describing a little bit about Acorn itself. There are a lot of technical details, I'm sure, that go into that, but maybe at a higher level, how does Acorn sort of interface with OSF such that it makes this research activity data useful for multiple personas, as you're suggesting?
Yeah, and just so you know, I have a little timer that I'm putting in the mixer, and I look at it. That's what I'm looking at to my left. But
I need one of those.
Yeah, right. And so, this as a quick aside to answer your question, it started when I got to work, and 5 days in, I'm like, hi, I'm Jason. Do you have a list of all your projects and PIs? Because I'm a very opinionated guy, and I want to do the right thing once and not repeat myself, right? And so you might be surprised to know that it wasn't the most forthcoming with having a list, right? And so one of the things, we had these fact sheets that we had to do. We had to update them. And so it was a Microsoft doc file that got sent around. And then there was just back and forth between comms and scientists. And I was told, well, comms has a very particular format that they don't want to change. And then I sat next to comms. Like, literally, this would be the part where I'm like, and then here's Audrey. And she was like, oh yeah, I don't care. Let's make it way better. And so, just like I do with my resume, I wanted to automate it. So you save the data in a central standardized form and source, and then you use technology to make those artifacts. And so I don't want to focus, or I'll just use the singular. I want to focus on the data, the research, the science, and what it means. And I want to have an automatically generated PDF. I want to have an automatically generated presentation or website. Like an example, and I can put in the chat, is one of our outputs is research.ornl.gov. And that's a catalog of what we have so far. And so it's like cute. So within the lab, we have these distributed buckets, we call them, where we have 8 directorates. And so each directorate got a bucket. And the directorates, can have their researchers maintain literally a JSON file that composes or contains all of the information of their associated research. And then once that's merged into main, it can be then included into the larger catalog. It can be included to use to make all those other artifacts and stuff like that. And so that's within the lab. And then it's federated to be expanded to all of the labs. And the buckets, by the way, I literally have one on my GitHub page. Like, I have a GitHub repository for my own things. We're not going to add it, but the point is, if ORNL wanted to, they could. And so we're totally portable, trying to be this distributed work on commodity hardware type thing. And so laser focusing on what you were asking on, like how people can use it. If you're not in the lab and anybody can use it anywhere, and that's why we open sourced it. So if you have cargo install Acorn CLI, and then you have all the power and promise of the tools. And then not even stopping there is working with Fuda and Daniel. And by the way, Daniel is much taller than he looks in his. You don't want me to tell you that, but it's a secret.
I agree. I can vouch for that.
He's incredibly tall. I'm also, I'm average, but anyways, part of writing in like Acorn's written in Rust, and Daniel probably had a timer how long it was going to take before I say the word Rust. But one of the things that we're doing is we're going to output and export a Python package in addition to our. So Acorn is a CLI, is a command line tool that can run on CI and your desktop. It has built on a library that is exported as a crate on Rust for Rust, and there's a crate on Rust, and will soon be a package on PyPy, so that, for example, OSF can use it on their backend, because OSF uses a Django Python backend, right? And so I would love for them to rewrite it in Rust, but I know that's not going to happen, especially since they just rewrote some things. And so we're meeting them halfway and trying to collaborate with the COS to integrate like that. So I'm sorry I got a little excited, but I just there's so many ways to connect and use with them. That's what I don't know, can you be laser focused on a broad topic? But we really want to use this functionality, this automation, this technology, without having to make a special use case for each one. We want to use the central goodness, which is kind of a recurring theme. So, sorry, this has been empty for a little bit, so I'll pass it to my pet.
No trouble, Jason. Thanks for the explanation, and your energy is infectious. I love it. Josh, I wonder maybe to ask about something that you mentioned earlier about researchers who are conducting online experiments. I wonder if you can give maybe a couple of examples of what an online experiment looks like and how DataPipe fits into that, in terms of its integration with OSF.
Sure. When we interact with websites, computers, there's lots of things that we are doing on those devices that are relevant to questions in psychology and cognitive science and economics and so forth. And so a lot of behavioral research has started using the internet as a way to sample from much larger populations than you can sample from if you're conducting all your research in a laboratory environment. And so the tools that I've been working on for a long time are related to making this sort of easier and more accessible to folks. And one of the problems that you have to solve when you're doing that is, where does your data go? If you're collecting data from people on the internet, then you can't download it to your own computer. You need some sort of infrastructure in place to do that. And it's one of the more technically challenging parts for people to set up when they're first learning how to do this. So in these experiments, people are often playing something that is slightly gamified, testing their memory or something like that. And when they finish doing a particular task, we can send data off to the OSF that indicates their particular performance on that particular task. And it's a simple concept, but it has broad applications.
Yeah, I'm recalling our first conversation that we had. You used a term, born open data.
Yeah.
And that was new to me. I hadn't encountered that before. So I wonder, is this kind of what you're describing there, this born open data?
Yeah, so born open data is a term that I believe was coined by Jeff Rauter, cognitive scientist. And the idea is to make the data available at the moment it is collected. And this is sort of like maximally transparent in terms of data acquisition and what an experiment is producing. And on top of that, it also has this nice benefit that it removes a step for us in the process, right? Like if the data is just there on OSF, then it's there. And when we go to share our stuff, it's not another thing that we have to do.
That makes sense, and that's I think a great use case for for the value of OSF. But then again, I'm I'm a little biased. Speaking of that, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I think we're approaching our end time. But I wanted maybe to conclude by posing the same question to you both, and just about the value of OSF. So maybe, Jason, I can ask you, maybe pose the question to you first. Oak Ridge National Lab actually, I believe, had either been collaborating with us on OSF or had approached us, about the sort of integration that you wanted to do. And this open source ecosystem program acted as a mechanism for that to, to happen. I wonder, in thinking of the many, many research tools, including specifically open research tools out there, what about OSF is unique and, valuable to you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. I would say, like, the obvious part is that the Center for Open Science is it's a central focus, right? It's a bulletin board of sorts, where, I mean, there are a handful of organizations, not really that many, but there's only one that's explicitly Center for Open Science, right? And so someone's got to be the flag bearer for the movement. We've talked a lot about community building and stuff like that. So there's that, right? And then there's obviously the call, which was an opportunity. It is funny, due to kind of funding time restrictions, we ended up funding ourselves, so a little pay to play kind of thing, just to be involved. But I think it's important for an entity like the National Lab, a federally funded research and development center, to actively engage in these things. And so that belief is what drives, for me, example, me and Audrey. And so it was an opportunity with the right singular thing. And then lastly, OSF is amazing, right? Even if you were to look, you won't see anything on OSF from me yet. But even the idea of just the idea of pre-registration is very powerful. And so we got to go somewhere, and it's a good place to start, I think. And so far, so good.
I like it, and I really appreciated having Oak Ridge as part of this cohort, just because it's an interesting, again, use case or instance of I'm struggling to think of a word beside persona, but we've had Oak Ridge, we've got, as Fuda mentioned, the NII in Japan, which is also, I believe, a public entity. So an interesting mix of both, of research that's taking place both publicly and privately, that that's we're helping, I guess, with OSF, we're helping to support. So we've definitely appreciated working with your team. Josh, I'll pose the same question to you just to conclude today's program. If you wouldn't mind just kind of describing what about OSF is unique. And if I'm not mistaken, you had been a longtime OSF user prior to DataPipe.
Yeah, I have more OSF components than I can count right now. But yeah, I mean, I think what OSF is this amazing sort of general tool, right? It's not tailored to a particular discipline. It's not tailored to a particular use case. It is a place where lots of different ways of communicating and being open about science can exist. And I think what is really exciting to me about something like the open source ecosystem is that, your all job is to do this general tool, but there's lots of interesting cases where we could do things that are specific to, say, behavioral researchers running experiments online that really aren't, your thing, but with this ability to create open source contributions and to integrate with an API and things like that. Now we can build those things, and we can turn this general purpose tool into something that has this option to tailor it really specifically to use cases and help automate and make those use cases a lot more powerful.
Josh, Jason, thank you both so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you making the time. A special thanks to all of our attendees who, especially those who stuck with us the entire time. Really appreciate you all taking the time to hear from us as well. And again, as always, a shout out to my colleagues at COS for helping me support this event. So we will have some information that we'll send out post-event with some links to resources and information that we've mentioned throughout the program today. That might be Monday before that comes out, but we'll definitely get that to you. As always, visit us at cos.io for information on the Center for Open Science, and then osf.io is where you can find the Open Science Framework. So whether you were someone who had had no experience at all with research software development or open source software, or you're a developer who is steeped in all of this, hope you found value out of this event and really appreciate you joining us. So enjoy your weekends. Thanks very much.